So I remade this Anberlin song in a couple of days because I've been listening to them for about 20 years. They're from my hometown. I've seen them live recently. They just put out a new album, and I wanted to learn more about the writing process. So let's dive in. So if we start off taking a look at the guitars here, there are a lot of really neat guitar layers in this that I've had a lot of fun deconstructing and figuring out how they just made these work together. So the main riff only comes in twice in the song. It comes in the intro and then later on in the bridge or the middle 8 section. So with this one, at the time of recording, this came out in 2005, I believe their guitarists were primarily using Marshall amps. Which I've got for the majority of the rhythm section here. But for this lead riff here, I've actually got this just running through a 5150 model. So if we listen to this in isolation here, just all the guitars. Really cool riff. This took a little while to learn just because it's got some cool like alternate picking parts that I actually played. I think all down picking on this one just in different sections to kind of get it a little more clean. But I'm running this through a 5150 style amp just to kind of differentiate it between the other amplifiers that are being used, which are again primarily Marshalls. So with this, I found this Punch and Judas preset that was pretty close. I think I raised the mids a little bit and then adjusted the speaker cabinet volume. I did up the room send a little bit just to help it kind of gel with the rest of the track because in isolation it sounded a little too just separated from the other rhythm guitars. So if I just turn this on and off, I'll let you hear what that sounds like. So it adds a little bit more of that room sound in there. Exaggerated there. But that just helped it blend a little bit more within the context of the mix there. And then again, that one only comes in a couple different times. And then you've got a few little riffs that are more or less lead-ins to different parts of the chorus and the pre-chorus. So next we have the rhythm guitars that are playing in the clean section of the song in the verses. So this is what those sound like. Two sections here. Again, these are just Marshall style amplifiers. So with this, I'm using Guitar Rig 6. It's just a JMP style Marshall amp. I've got this on the low gain setting with the preamp pretty high, so it doesn't actually really break up, but it's a little more clean sounding. And then I've just double tracked this, panned it left and right, not completely to the left and completely to the right, but it's a little less wide than the chorus. So when it does open up into the chorus and the pre-chorus, you get that sense of space and it opening up a little bit more. And then the clean lead is the exact same amplifier setting here. So if I play that, just added a little bit more reverb. See, I've got the mix pretty low in here, but it gives it a little bit more sense of space. So the intro guitar is really just the same chord that's being strummed in the verse guitars. The main difference with this is we've got this filter on here that's slowly fading in the higher frequencies. And you can also hear that in the drums and the bass guitar to create some kind of anticipation going into the main riff when it opens up here. And that just helps to add a little bit more impact. So when you're going into that main riff, it's giving a little bit more oomph. And you're also introducing kind of a teaser almost to the verse section. So you're already familiar with that chord that's being played. So next, if we look at the pre-chorus and chorus, the pre-chorus here just is also using a Marshall style amplifier primarily. And these big open chords. This is in drop D tuning. And basically what I'm using in here is just these Marshall style amplifiers that's also blended with a Mesa Boogie kind of dual rectifier model. And you can see on here the splitter between the two of them. I'm leaning 66%, so primarily towards the Marshall style amplifier. I do have the treble and the presence dialed a good deal down just because I recorded this on my Telecaster. One of the guitarists for Anberlin primarily uses a Les Paul, and I believe they both use guitars that use humbuckers. So you get a little bit more of a darker sound, but just because I recorded this on a Telecaster, the treble and presence are a bit more dialed back. But the gain isn't as high as you would normally think, just so you do get that kind of cleaner chord structure out of this because there's so many different guitars layered within the mix later on, which we'll hear. And something kind of cool about this, and there's multiple points in the song where this happens, is you'll hear kind of a call and response between these guitars. So if we listen just to this last few measures of the chorus or the pre-chorus here leading into the chorus, you hear this little riff up here that's just being played on that same amp model that was in the beginning. And it's a cool just little lead in to kick it into the chorus. And what's different about the chorus here as well is you can see that with this one, I've quad tracked this. So I've got your two left and rights here that are just being played if I just play it all at once. So what's going on here is it's just, again, a hard left and hard right guitar on one, kind of duplicated that on the second passage here just to give it a little bit more body. The only thing I've really done different on this Crunch 2 channel is I copied the same amplifier settings I had from the Crunch 1 channel, but I just really dialed down the preamp a little bit more and the gain. So with this particular one, the Crunch 2 channel, you get a little more of that kind of treble and mid-range bitey sound, I guess that you would call out of a Marshall, and blend it in with the main sound. That gives it a little bit more just definition, particularly with these chords that are being played. So this is that Crunch 2 section versus the Crunch 1. So you can hear Crunch 1's definitely more bright. Crunch 2's got kind of a little bit more saturation to it, so you get a little bit more thickness out of that. And then we've also got this lead that's being played just throughout the choruses here. This has just got a little bit of eighth note delay on it that I'm sending to it. But again, that's being sent through the same amp models here. So verse 2 is pretty much the same as verse 1. The only difference is that this little lead that comes in plays through the entirety of verse 2 rather than just the second half, which is the case with verse 1. So again, it adds a little bit more of a differentiating factor between the first verse, but you're already familiar with that phrasing. So it gives you a little bit more just kind of, familiarity with that. And there's also some cool different things that are going on with the drums here. There's a little, I believe it's about here. There's a little hi-hat accent on here, right here. So this is a really cool example of just how you can reuse the same chords, but you can adjust the surrounding instrumentation with that just to give it a little bit more of a differentiating factor and keep the listener interested. So sticking to the guitars, again, going into the post-verse here, there's a little different section, and this is the only time this comes in the song. And all that really is there's these three chords here. First one just rings out, and then these two. And then you have these other chords underneath. So just some cool additional phrasing on there, keeping in the same key, obviously, but it's just a little bit different leading into the pre-chorus here, so just by themselves. Pre-chorus again. Interesting thing about this pre-chorus, though, is it cuts out right here, and there's a different lead guitar part. So it's just this part here. Again, just kind of double track this, pan it a little bit to the left and right to give it a little bit more stereo width. And then that leads right into the chorus guitars again. So again, this is something that was really neat in just relearning and recreating these guitar parts, because they use a lot of really neat phrasing that comes out just in the different structures of here to keep things interesting, instead of just kind of relying on the same formula of copying and pasting the chorus and everything. So the next interesting part is going to be the middle 8 section, or the bridge. And this is where the riff is reintroduced. And if I just play the full song here, leading into this, you can hear that there's a little bit of a kind of lead up building. And basically just the intro again. But what's neat is this is such a cool riff, and it's only used twice in the song. So you get kind of that kind of tension and like where you want to hear it again, but it's not overused. So it's a really cool writing technique just to only use that sparingly in here and just kind of hear when that comes in. It's got that much more of an impact for it. And leading into this, if I solo the rhythm guitars, it's got this really neat call and response section here. So on the outro, this part, you've got these higher chords that are playing out here, and doubled with the riff that comes in here. Not only does that help the section from the chorus blend in with the riff section into here, but it also creates a little bit more just variety within that same chord structure that's already being played. So it's a nice just kind of easing into the rest of the reintro here, as I've got it labeled here. And then again, at the end of this middle 8 part, or the bridge, you just got the outro, getting it back into the chorus. You got this riff. Coming back in. And then it uses this, what I've called the riff lo-fi, which is just the main riff, but this is a very filtered kind of staccato sounding riff here. Which, again, for a couple different reasons sounds really neat because, A, you've already heard this, so it's a riff that you're familiar with, but it sounds just different enough that it's creating some variety and some different kind of ear candy for you to listen to. And B, because it's taking out so much of the frequency range that was being built up in this bridge section, so that when the final chorus and this outro come in here, you're also getting hit with that full instrumentation again. So it kind of takes it from a real high energy part to a much lower energy, but still sounding interesting, and then right back to full kind of blown, guitar amps just being overdriven and everything. So the way I've achieved that is it's the same settings that I believe I have on the Marshall guitars here. Here's what it sounds like in isolation. But I've added this fuzz pedal to it. So what that does is just give it a little more distorted. It makes it a little more choppy sounding. But I've also done this in Ableton. So if you do have Ableton Live, you can use the Beats warp mode and do what's called preserving the transients here. So it's just this first arrow. And what that does is exactly what the name implies. It preserves the initial transient, or the attack of each note, and it kind of cuts off a little bit more of the decay of the remainder of the note. So I have this at 86, which you can see here, and I'll go ahead and dial that down just so you can hear exactly what that's doing. So that's obviously a little bit too much for that. But if you go ahead and use that, what it does is it creates a little bit more of a choppy sound, which they probably either did with some kind of a tremolo pedal or just manually chopping it up in Pro Tools or whatever recording software they used at the time. And a couple reasons why this is really cool is just because, A, this is a riff that you've already heard, so you're familiar with it. B, it's different enough, so although it's familiar, it's a different sound to it, so it's kind of catching your ear. And that's just done by, again, the effects that we've already talked about, and then EQing out the lows and the highs. But it's taking this high energy bridge section, leading into another high energy chorus and the outro. And what that's doing is taking it from really high level, bringing it way, way down. So then when it comes full instrumentation back in, it hits that much harder while retaining the impact. Because if you just went straight from, keeping it all maxed out, going to even more maxed out, you can't go any higher. So this is a really cool way to just kind of lead into that. So again, this is what it sounds like going into the final chorus and outro. So when it does come in, the bass and the drums and the vocals, it feels a lot more full body. So I'll let those play in the background. The guitar, I'm just doing some individual EQing on each amp essentially. So I'm doing a little bit of EQing on the 5150 here, boosting a little bit, 8K here. And then on the crunch ones, I'm actually dialing that same frequency down so they don't fight each other in the mix, although they're only there in a few times when they're playing at the same time. And then I'm just using the Waves Renaissance Axe compressor, and basically this just kind of levels out a little bit more of the guitar differentiating volumes in there, and just kind of brings them forward a little bit more in the mix. So in this genre specifically, it's very easy to just take the guitars and just play the root note on the bass, and that would sound fine for the song. But what's really cool about this in a lot of Anberlin songs is the bass is actually pretty different in just kind of skirting around the main riff. It's not always playing the root note. A really good opportunity to hear this in itself is just the verse. So if we listen to this, you can hear that the guitar is just strumming this one consistent chord, and you've got the bass doing its own kind of riffing on here. So in isolation. It's a really nice bass sound. It's got its own just kind of riff movement going on in there. The bassist, believe, plays primarily Fender basses, like a Jaguar style bass. I have a Fender jazz bass. So to get that kind of punchy sound, you can see just the effects chain I've got going on. I have some compression, just evening out the pick attack here. It's going into an Ampeg SVT, boosting the treble, a little bit of the bass. So nothing too extreme on here, and then just adding a little bit of EQ. I believe I'm scooping out, yeah, a little around 3K, which is a lot of where the guitars are gonna sit there too. So by carving this out, it's just gonna leave a little bit more space for the guitars to blend in. So the bass was fun to re-record. This was a lot more intricate than I expected, so it took me a little while to just kind of nail this down. I had to do it in a couple passages. But even with the main riff, this is something that I hadn't noticed before. When you hear this full riff come in, from what I can hear at least, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the bass isn't actually duplicating those exact notes, so it's playing this. So it's staying on the same note for a full bar before alternating. So it's giving a lot more space for that guitar riff to play. And the only place where this is really different is when this riff comes back in, right here. So with the guitars. So again, it's not just mirroring the guitars there. The bass is kind of doing its own thing, but it's working in tandem with the guitars, which I think is really neat. And this was one of the big writing techniques that I kind of learned from Anberlin, is that you can kind of go around the edges of the guitar with the bass and just kind of dance around that main melody. So it keeps it interesting, but then when everything locks in and it is playing the same note, you're getting a lot more of that kind of heavy consistency when everything just is really playing at the same level. And last but not least are the drums. So nothing too different processing-wise and recording-wise than I do on my other sessions. But this one, I did prioritize the overheads a little bit more than I normally do, just because you have a little bit more of an open sound. Which again, you have right around that like early 2000s, turn of the century kind of alternative music. You have this much more natural, open sounding, just drum kit sound here. Some of that's due in part to the drum room. So I've got the room mics just ducked in a little bit, and then I've got what's called this drum crush on here. And what's cool about this particular channel here is that I've actually got this automated. If I solo this and let you hear it on its own, this is what it kind of sounds like. Real gritty, nasty sounding kind of drum sound. And this is done by just really over compressing it using what's called the British mode on the 1176, where it's got this aggressive attack and release section. Got the double lock on here, adding a little bit more crunch. This really brought up a lot of the cymbals, so I just EQ'd that out. And then again, this auto filter is just for that introductory part of the song. But you can see here on here that I've got this so that this particular drum crush channel only comes in on the higher energy parts of the songs. So you've got it on the choruses here, and then it just really ducks down in volume about 3 decibels in other parts. And then it's really not too audible in the verses here because I didn't want that to really kind of fight in volume. And what I've got processing wise for drums is pretty much the same in any rock session that I'm doing. I've just got this front DAW, which is just kind of a preamp simulator. I've got the Universal Audio Vision strip here from API, just adding a little bit of high end and taking out a little bit of the kind of nasally mid-range here. And then a large part of the sound is the bus compressor from the API 2500, which is probably my favorite drum compressor here. So as an added bonus to recreating this song, I found on Matty Mullen's YouTube channel, who's now singing with Anberlin, he posted an isolated vocal take of Paperthin Hymn. So I blended that in with the session just to kind of hear what some vocals sound like. And here's what it sounds like. You said forever over and over. So really cool hearing that with vocals. I saw them here in Nashville about 2 months, I think, ago, and they were really awesome. So definitely check them out if you get the chance. So the biggest thing that I learned in re-recording this was paying closer attention to the guitar work in this. There's a lot of thought that has been put into this, and a lot of other Anberlin songs as well, obviously. The way that their riffs work and their two guitarists play off of each other works really, really well. There's some really awesome call and response sections in this. And just the overall chord voicings and structure of just the writing in general is really, really nice. And then once you double that with the rhythm section of the bass and the drums, it adds a lot more kind of punchiness and syncopated nature to that. And then obviously I don't have the vocals in here because I'm not going to attempt to sing this, but that just helps to really emphasize the vocals and the lyrical content in there as well. So not a whole lot effects wise. I just have a couple different delays on here, and then a drum room, that drum crush bus that I went through earlier. And as far as master bus processing, I don't really have a whole lot different going on here. I'm just doing a little bit of a low cut around 30 Hertz. I'm doing some compression on here. I think with this, it's probably reaching up to about 4 decibels or so on the snare hits. Adding in the Universal Audio Studer tape, doing some just broad stroke EQ for mastering, adding in some high end on here. You can see I've got this set to mid side. So it's adding a little bit more just in the center channel and then the side channels, which I've talked about in some of my other videos as well. Multi-band compression, really just kind of evening out some of the low-end dynamics. Not really doing a whole lot here. And something a little different that I tried out in this session is using the glue compressor from Cytomic. I'm using that not only for compression, as you'll see here, if I just play that for a second, dial down the volume. Doing a little bit of compression, but the makeup gain I've got set so that it's clipping on these snare hits and a few other just really transient heavy parts of the song. And what this is doing is adding a little bit more just clipping off those transients before it's hitting the limiter, and acting kind of as a limiter in and of itself too, to get a little bit more natural volume boost without really slamming it into, like, you know, Waves L1 or something like that. So this was a lot of fun to relearn the instrumentation in about 2 days and put everything down on paper, metaphorically speaking. So please like and subscribe if you liked the video. Leave any comments or questions you may have, and let me know what you'd like to see next. I'd be happy to dive into some other songs and see what we can learn. So I'll play it all the way through now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.